What is up? Good morning. Happy Four-Eyed Championship Day. There's a new tournament every Monday, apparently. And welcome to Mock It Like It's Hot, Club Fantasy's weekly mock draft show. I am the host now, Ryan Weisse, and we are here to get you ready for your 2022 fantasy drafts. And when I say we, I mean me and my co-host, Austin Amandolia. Austin, welcome. Good morning. How are you today, buddy?
Doing great. Two tournaments starting this Monday. Today's also draft day for the Warrior Bowl. So that literally started at 11 a.m. So good thing I'm the 12th pick in that draft, so I can
There
wait
you
a little
go.
bit to get to my pick.
And see, I'm a very selfish person, so I'm going to bring up the leagues I'm in. That's why I saw you were in it this morning. I had a feeling you would bring it up, and I would not do it justice because it's not a league I've ever been in. But can you walk us through Warrior Bowl a little bit? Because I was going to talk more about the Four-Eye tournament later. So what is Warrior Bowl?
Yeah, this is my first year participating, but it's very similar to all the other tournaments out there. It's a charity league. There's all sorts of divisions. A lot of folks show up, and they always try and throw a wrinkle in on the scoring. This year, they have kind of tiered reception bonuses for running back, wide receiver, and tight end. So running backs only get a 0.75 points for receptions. Receivers get the full PPR, and then it's tight end premium, so they get a 1.5 for receptions. So it's a little interesting. They've done some things to actually rebalance the running back position so that the pass catching running backs aren't as heavily weighted as they typically would be. But it's a fun time, good cause. Love the charity leagues that the fantasy community goes after.
Perfect. I love it. And our guest this morning is Brandon Hay from IDP Guys. We stuck with the IDP Guys, the talent pool this week. We had Nate on last week. We invite Brandon on this week. Brandon, you've done a couple of shows here with Club Fantasy, so we very much appreciate you coming and joining us on the Mock Draft Show. Good morning.
Good morning. Thanks for having me. And I was in the Warrior Bowl last year. I actually forgot to sign up for it this year. But yeah, it's a fun tournament.
Perfect. Now, Brandon, I like to do this before we get started. So let people know what kind of stuff you work on during the fantasy season and where they can find your work.
Yes, at IDP Guys, during the season, I do offensive sleepers every week. And I think I'm going to dip my toes in doing some actual IDP stuff this year. And I just started at Dynasty Nerds a couple months ago, and I do Devi content for them.
Awesome. And walk people through Devi a little bit, because we tend to cater to a not so advanced audience in fantasy football. And I don't mean that in a bad way. We're just typically playing in regular 8, 10, 12-man PPR leagues. What is Devi when it comes to fantasy football?
Right. It's the next step after Dynasty. So you get to, there's outside of the rookie draft, there's another draft, a Devi draft each year. It depends. It can be 3 rounds to 5 rounds. And you're drafting players that are still in college. So if you draft, say you've already drafted Bijan Robinson, but a lot of, regular just NFL guys know him. He's coming out. He's going to be probably the number 1 running back. So whenever he gets to the NFL, he's already on your roster. So it's kind of a farm system, where you pick players in college and then they come immediately to your team. It's got an added piece of strategy because some people go heavy on those college players, and then you can do a mixture of NFL players and college players. It's kind of the next step on kind of being like your own little fantasy football GM, trying to scout these players in college.
I love it. And we had the great Scott Fish on our show earlier this offseason, and we were talking to him a little bit about Devi, and he joked how he's been playing Devi like before the internet, and he used to have like local high school kids scouting for him, and it was absolutely crazy stories he was telling us. But one of my favorite pieces of advice he gave was, even if you don't like college football and you don't follow college football, just look at Devi as giving you more trade pieces. These are things you can trade away to get NFL ready players. So you don't necessarily need to love college football to play in Devi. So just keep that in mind as well, folks, if you're looking for something different. Speaking of something different, today's draft, I decided to add an actual twist. And what I mean by that is today's draft is going to be your pretty standard 12-team PPR league. However, we are adding 3rd round reversal, and we'll talk a little bit more about the strategy around 3rd round reversal, but the Cliffs notes are the 3rd round stays the same draft order as the 2nd round. So 1 to 12 in the 1st round, 12 to 1 in the 2nd round, but then 12 to 1 again in the 3rd round. And then it is your typical serpentine draft. So that's going to be the difference today. We'll talk more about that draft. I got it up on the screen now. I'm going to go ahead and get it started. We have our boy Joe with the first pick of the draft. And I'm going to ask, I think that's actually me who has notifications on. If either of you guys have notes on, turn those off. But anyway, the draft is now started. So we talked a little bit about third round reversal before we even got in here. And it turns out my two guests today have very different opinions on third round reversal. Austin, you're permanent here. I'm going to let you get started. So walk people around third round reversal and how it maybe changes the draft landscape.
Yeah. I like third round reversal because it tries to balance out the advantage that comes with the first few picks in the draft. And I think it also just creates a strategy differentiation. But I think it does help for those that just kind of by luck of the draw get thrown at the end of the draft. And so it takes forever for them to get their first pick, that they get to the third round a little bit quicker than they typically would. And I think it makes it much more interesting to be the first pick, because then you have this scenario where you're not necessarily going to get two players back to back at the 2-3 turn. And I feel like the first 3 rounds, like while they're not necessarily where you find your most valuable players, they are where you find your solid floor guys. And so I think overall just helps rebalance the league a bit. And I love something different in general, and so I'm always here for at least a couple of third round reversals in my leagues.
Now, before we jump over to Brandon, and I'll let you kind of give counterpoints to third round reversal. Austin, how does third round reversal, if you're in a league where you can choose your draft slot? And I know there are a lot of leagues out there where they'll do like bar games and things along those lines, where instead of instead of randomizing a draft spot, you get to choose your draft slot. So that's something you may want to consider for your home leagues. But Austin, if you were in a league where you get to choose your draft spot, and Scott Fish this year was an example of that, where you got to choose your draft spot, how does third round reversal impact what slot you would choose?
So this might be more of a personal taste. It doesn't really change my strategy on location as much, because I tend to be just a draft the best player available drafter in general. So where I'm at in the draft order doesn't tend to have any bearing on my overall strategy. What I will say is I do always love being on the ends, and being in third round reversal makes me feel more comfortable being on the ends, because between the second and third round, I have less time where I have to wait around for my next pick. And so it will change the strategy a bit when it comes to the third round, since I won't have 2 picks really close to each other. But overall, I tend to prefer being on the front or the back end. I feel like I tend to stress too much when I'm one of the first 3 picks about like getting the first 3 picks wrong. So I tend to prefer the 10 to 12 side of the board, but really any of the ends feels the most comfy to me, gets me out of any kind of dead zones that arise.
There you go. And for anyone following along on YouTube, you will see Austin is the 12th draft slot. He took the very last slot. So Brandon, you have different feelings about third round reversal. Go ahead and spill them for us.
Yes. I just think that the third round reversal totally flips the script and gives like pick 12 way too much power or more value than the first pick. I know first pick, you get the first player. If you think about it, with the third round reversal, this is how it goes. For the first pick, you get the first, 24th, and the 36th pick. But for the 12th pick, you get the 12th, the 13th, and the 25th. So you get 3 players way hot. You get 2 players higher than the first pick. I just feel like it kind of evens out, strategy and everything. The first pick gets the best player, but then the 12th pick will get 2 players back to back. So that's at least my opinion on third round reversal. I usually won't join a league if it has third round reversal.
Wow. So you are just adamantly against third round reversal. So my question to you is, you used an interesting term, and I don't mean to put you on the spot here. You said it balances out. Wouldn't that be a good thing? Like, don't we want it to balance out? Or
I meant like just the regular draft.
Oh, my misunderstood. Okay.
Yeah, I didn't word that right. I think it just balances out later on because you have those back-to-back round picks.
So you think 3 in the first 25 is way too much for the 12th pick, essentially?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. And that's fair. So I guess I'm going to start with you then. Who, in your opinion, is Jonathan Taylor your universal first round pick? And if he is, or even if he isn't, does the first round pick hold enough value where 12-13 balances it, or does it need that extra layer?
I think in one quarterback, Jonathan Taylor is number one, and I think 12-13 is fine to balance that because I think he's number one, but I don't think there's as large of a gap as other people might be saying. And then at 12-13, like in this draft, it's Jonathan Taylor, and then 12th you get Devontae Adams and Tyreek Hill. I mean, I think that's way more value than the number one pick.
Okay, I mean, if you look, I say Devontae Adams and Hill versus Taylor and whoever Joe is going to grab at the next turn, and we know Joe, so it's going to be an awful pick. But we'll have to wait and see what he does with that pick. But the long and short of it is, you brought up a very good point earlier on, and we kind of referenced Scott Fishbowl, is you changed your draft slot when you found out this was a single QB league versus a super flex or a 2 QB league. How did that influence how does the difference in quarterbacks influence where you want to pick? And did third round reversal play into that as well?
Third round reversal didn't really. If it's super flex, I want one of the top 4 picks because I think the quarterbacks, the 4 that I really like are Allen, Mahomes, Herbert, and Burrow. Okay. And so I want kind of like the top 4 or 5. I guess you could put Lamar, 5th for me. And I moved to 7 because in one quarterback, I don't like being even in super flex the first couple picks because, like we're saying, it's such a long time until you pick. I like kind of being in the middle because you kind of get, you're in the middle of all the rounds. So
speaking
you
of
don't have
middle,
to wait so long.
You have about 15 seconds. I don't want you to time out on this. So,
Well,
so while he's looking at that, Austin, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to build off of what Brandon was saying. In both Scott Fishbowl and Warrior Bowl, I've ended up at the end of the draft. They're both super flex. Scott Fishbowl, I had the 10th pick, and in Warrior Bowl, I have the 12th. And it's just so hard in that super flex format to find a good quarterback that you feel really good using your first round pick on in that range, because once you get there, the top 5 or 6 guys that are just going to be elite or have the potential to be the QB1 are all gone. And so I ended up in Scott Fishbowl getting Russell Wilson with my second pick. But like there's kind of that gap there, particularly in these formats where they're emphasizing different aspects of quarterback play, like completion percentage or waiting passing touchdowns to kind of balance out with the rushing quarterback. So I definitely like Brandon's approach to switch his draft position once realizing that this was a one QB mock.
Yeah. And one thing I want to point out too is with third round reversal, the middle of the draft, for those out there who prefer middle of the draft because they want the shorter gap in between picks, there's no change whatsoever. So honestly, you're balancing out a problem for, 1, 2 and 11, 12, but the guys in the middle may just stand, and we're going to see that in this draft. The guys in the middle are going to stay with their exact same draft picks and probably still build a very solid draft because they're only dealing with about 11 picks in between each pick versus 24, and then the huge gap for the first overall pick. So there's something to be said where Brandon said he won't even join a league if it's third round reversal. But Brandon, if you had great friends in that league, you could just take the middle and then it doesn't matter anyway. So.
Yeah, I might have been a little extreme with saying I won't ever. There's times I have, but I strongly, am against it, and I will voice my opinion.
And I do want to point out that I didn't even know that about Brandon when I decided this third round reversal thing. So we had booked Brandon way earlier in the summer, and I made the decision last week, honestly, because we had Scott Fish. We couldn't get it in last week, and I kind of wanted to get people's opinions. So we lucked out in that Austin is a big proponent of third round reversal, and Brandon is not. So that's really, as we hit the third round reversal is basically out the door now. We have a relatively normal draft, and we're going to talk more about that. So I actually want to start looking at your picks, and Brandon, I'm going to start with you. You went ahead and chose the 7 slot, and you doubled up on running back, which is a very common strategy in fantasy football. It's one that I typically employ myself, with one exception. We're going to get to that here in a second. However, you started off with Najee Harris and you jump over to Nick Chubb. Najee Harris, we just had an article written recently by someone you might know who said Najee Harris could 100% be the number 1 fantasy running back this season. What are your takes on Najee moving into the season?
Yeah, I could see that happening because we saw with Big Ben last year, a lot of dump offs and everything, and with possibly if Kenny Pickett starts, a rookie could have the same thing. They've said that it's pretty much going to be Najee, all year. They didn't really address that second running back spot very much. So yeah, I could totally see that because with Jonathan Taylor, he had a great year, but with Matt upgraded quarterback, they might throw the ball a little bit more, so he might not get nearly as many touches or any receptions. So I could totally see Najee Harris being number one by the end of the season.
Absolutely love it. And then this we ran as a full PPR format. You have no worries about Nick Chubb in PPR formats. I mean, landing him as your second running back in the second round feels like robbery, but
yeah, I do have worries, but to be totally honest, I'm usually a heavy wide receiver guy, and I wait on running back.
Interesting.
But since the 3 wide receivers went top 5, I didn't really feel great about picking a wide receiver that early, so that's where I went Najee. And then, 4 more wide receivers went before my second pick, and I just thought the value for Chubb, like you were saying, was just so high, and the wide receiver position is so deep.
Perfect. And that makes a lot of sense. Austin, you definitely went the opposite route, being on the end, starting off wide receiver. I think that's a very common thing in drafts this year. You start with Devontae Adams and Tyreek Hill, arguably the 2 best wide receivers in the NFL. And then they both changed teams this offseason. So you're not worried about scheme changes with 2 alpha wide receivers?
I'm not, because I'm going with the philosophy of put the ball in your best player's hands and let them make a play. And Devontae Adams and Tyreek Hill, they're going to be the best receivers on both of their teams. They, like you said, they're arguably the 2 best receivers in the league. And so I'm going to trust the talent there. And I think they're going to be just fine. I think particularly we saw that Miami offense last year. They were targeting Jalen Waddle like all the time, and they were a very high volume offense in general, running a lot of plays per game. And so I think there's going to be plenty of targets and receptions for Tyreek Hill, that he'll have a solid floor, even if we don't see as many deep balls as we're maybe used to with him. And then I'm going to go with the relationship between Devontae Adams and Derek Carr being legit, and there being a friendship there, meaning that it's going to benefit Adams. I was listening to Charles McDonald's podcast, and he said, basically, I think Aaron Rodgers is going to miss Devontae Adams a lot more than Devontae Adams is going to miss Aaron Rodgers. And I agree with that. I think that Derek Carr is a serviceable enough quarterback that he's going to get Devontae Adams the ball, and he's going to be just fine.
All right, we're going to get into my first controversial take, and we're going to get back to the draft strategy. But I made a joke, which came true, because it's just the kind of guy I am, that Joe was going to completely blow his first round pick. And Joe said he got sniped all the way from Mark Andrews to his pick. And he goes ahead, Joe, being a Philly fan, selects A.J. Brown as the 9th wide receiver off the board. And to me, this is absolute lunacy. Unless you expect Philly to completely change their offense and ignore Dallas Goedert and Devonta Smith, I don't see A.J. Brown putting up the kind of numbers to be a top 10 fantasy wide receiver. A.J. Brown, I think, is going to end up being one of those things where he's more valuable to his team than he is to fantasy. Brandon, am I wrong? Do you have strong feelings either way about A.J. Brown?
I love A.J. Brown.
My goodness.
But let me finish. Before last season, I had him as like a top 5 wide receiver. And then I don't love him going to Philly, but probably not top 10. He's probably like in that range from 10 to 15.
Okay.
And looking at if Tyreek didn't get traded to Miami, I think I would have Waddle ahead of him, but we don't really know how Tyreek and Waddle are going to do there. Just looking at the board after him. So if you really want a wide receiver, I probably would have taken A.J. Brown over all those wide receivers that went after him.
Okay. I have strong feelings on T. Higgins and Keenan Allen, so I don't necessarily agree with that statement. But to me, because those wide receivers are so grouped in, I think that's a good spot to maybe go running back again, or to get involved in the tight end train, though he did want Mark Andrews. Austin, how are your feelings on A.J. Brown?
Yeah, I have mixed feelings on A.J. Brown, because on the one hand, Philly really went towards the run game towards the second half of the season last year, and actually saw some success that way. So I feel like they probably take a similar approach. But I also think some of that was because the offensive line wasn't the best in pass blocking last year. Like Jalen Hurts, like people give him a lot of heck for his performance last year and his ability to manage the pass game, but he was also having to make a lot of plays out of structure last year, and he can get the ball to his receivers when playing out of structure. But I think when you're doing that the whole game and you're just running for your life, it makes your job much harder. So I could see that offensive line develops a bit more and he can, just focus on getting the ball to his receivers more. We could see them take advantage of the pass game. But I agree. I probably would have gone running back at that spot because I don't really love any of the receivers in that area, except with Baker Mayfield now in Carolina. I might have taken reach on DJ Moore at that spot, given that it was going to be a long time before it came back to Joe.
All right, let's talk strategy a little bit. So we have had 3 tight ends and 3 quarterbacks go so far. I'm going to start with the tight ends because it has become a tradition. Our guy Joel loves to join these drafts, and he, like me, adores Travis Kelce and the positional advantage that Travis Kelce provides at tight end. So Joel starts off with the draft with Kelce and then CeeDee Lamb, Javonte Williams. Right next to him, Alex Mateo, went Dalvin Cook, Stephon Diggs, Kyle Pitts. And then later on, our Motts, who's a friend of mine from my home league, goes Eckler, Andrews, Connor. So we are seeing 3 different ways to build your team, whereas, I guess, never mind, Joel and Alex did the same thing where they went 1 of each. The other guy went 2 running backs and a tight end. Brandon, how are your thoughts on early tight end? Do you prefer great? Do you prefer late? Do you gamble with the middle round guys? And what do you think about where these 3 tight ends went so far?
Yeah, so if I can get one, I guess now it's extended tight end wise. It was, for last year was really the big 3, and now I guess it's the big 5 if you include Andrews and Pitts. I'm fine taking one of those early if they're available because, like you said, you get that big advantage. And then if I don't get one of those, I'll usually wait for, say, a Hawkinson or a Goddard type one, still a top 10, 12 tight end, depending on where they fall. And then if I get someone later in like that, like even say something like a Dawson Knox, then I'll make sure to maybe take another tight end earlier than I normally would just to kind of protect that, investment.
Okay. Is this the order where you would take the good guys? Is Kelce your 1, Andrews your 2, despite what happened last year?
No, Andrews is my 1.
And is Pitts your 3?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I know you're a big Dynasty and Devy guy, and Pitts in Dynasty minds obviously could arguably be the tight end 1 just due to age. And what he did last year was almost historic for a rookie tight end. So I wasn't quite sure if Pitts was there. And then we just saw Kittle finally go off the board to Austin, in fact, at the turn. Austin, looking at the quarterbacks, we talk about this every week. Now, Pat J. Penn has, I've noticed, auto drafted a little bit. I don't know if Allen was an auto draft or if he was back on. I feel like he was back on, but I can't say for sure. But we have Allen go first in the 3rd round, but late 3rd round, and then 3 quarterbacks in the 4th round. Everybody knows my thoughts. I am typically I won't even look at the elite guys until the 5th round. That was how I drafted when I was in this draft. The very first episode of the show, I forgot to draft a quarterback and still got Kirk Cousins in like the 14th round. So you can do well. Austin, we probably have talked about this before, but hopefully we have new viewers this week. What are your takes on drafting quarterbacks early, and how do you feel about the order that these guys went?
Yeah, sometimes it just depends on my draft order. When I'm at the end of the draft in particular, I tend to wait really long for a quarterback because having that 12th spot, you get a lot of the elite running backs gone and a lot of some of the top 3 receivers. So I tend to focus on building my skill position players and also trying to get that positional advantage at tight end before finding a solid quarterback in the 7th to 10th round, kind of depending on who is available. So I agree with that strategy. Sometimes when I'm drafting, though, it's just too enticing, right? Like the elite quarterbacks, they tend to go in the same order. So it's sometimes hard to have them on your roster. And I actually just got my first Lamar Jackson share ever in a redraft league. And I was like, I can't not. Like, I've never had him. I got to get him now. And I have a similar thing that's happened with Patrick Mahomes. I think the quarterback ordering here is interesting, but we can talk about that more if we want. But the ordering, I do tend to wait until some of those later rounds, and you can find someone that's serviceable.
And then I'm just going to point out that Zach knows me far too well and took Dalton Schultz ahead of Darren Waller. I believe personally, just so I would talk him up, because I am a huge Dalton Schultz guy. I think Dalton Schultz is likely going to be a top 3 tight end in fantasy again this year. And I also took Schultz ahead of Waller and George Kittle in my Scott Fishbowl draft. So Zach, patronizing works. I think it was an absolutely great pick. Way to go on your team in winning this draft. But all kidding aside, let's take a look at what Joe is doing. I set this league up, I believe, with 3 wide receivers and 2 flex spots. So Joe is living in the hero RB or anchor RB strategy. So he took Jonathan Taylor with the first overall pick and has backed it up now with 5 straight wide receivers. Brandon, do you have thoughts on zero RB, anchor RB? Is it a way you would consider building your team if the draft felt that way, or is that not something you're interested in? I ask because you definitely started with 2 very good running backs this draft.
Yes. So usually I don't go this way, as I mentioned earlier. And
you said you go wide receiver early. I completely forgot about that. My apologies.
Yeah. So what Joe is doing, I've done that before. I wouldn't have taken Cooks there, but like the other wide receivers I like. And I just feel, especially in redraft, with how teams use running backs now more in a committee, and especially in PPR, you can find those guys late. So what I do is try to find a guy maybe like a Nyheim Hines that I know is, has pretty good floor, and then just look for like backup running backs, either draft or waiver, and just hope when someone goes down, I have those, but I have all those wide receivers ready.
I love it. And you said some really smart stuff, but you tried to slip something in that I don't know if I can just let pass. You wouldn't take Brandon Cooks that early. What do you have issues with Brandon Cooks, or you expect him to fall in the draft?
This is a very pro Brandon Cooks show.
Yes.
I was not aware. So, hey, I like Brandon Cooks as a player. I just
don't like 1,000-yard seasons.
I would rather the way the draft worked. Oh, it's going the opposite way. So maybe I will amend what I said, because I thought it was going the opposite way, and Marquise Brown went after him. I would definitely want Marquise Brown over Brandon Cooks.
And I'm with that completely.
I know it was back-to-back, but I would take Darnell Mooney over Brandon Cooks also.
Okay. And so I would actually have agreed with that, because my ridiculous question I was going to ask was, would it have felt better if he had taken Mooney over Cooks and Cooks said 6-1? Right now, I don't know if you've had a chance to glance at all, Austin, but is there anything standing out to you in the draft right now?
I think for me, well, we are almost merging this show into a Duncan on Joe Mock It Like It's Hot collab, because I do think the 5 receivers in a row from the 1 spot makes me a little nervous, particularly given the running back talent that's still out there.
Yeah, I want to see who he ends up with. This is the beauty of mock drafts though, folks. And Austin, you're about to make your picks. Yes. So I'm going to give you a second here. This is the beauty of mock drafting, is that I don't know if Joe would approach a draft like this, but the zero RB folks would tell you to at least grab as many wide receivers as you can start. So this is not a completely unheard of strategy that Joe is implementing. And I don't know if it's something he would normally do, but I will always reserve judgment until I see who he gets later on, because it's going to be interesting to see how running backs fall, because Austin, you took advantage of the 3rd round reversal and was able to land David Montgomery as your RB1 while starting with 2 wide receivers. And David Montgomery is a rather controversial running back right now, but Joe has defended Montgomery as I believe it was a top 10 running back on his Dunking on Joe show. So there could be someone who falls, or it could be a platoon that falls that's going to work out really, really well for him. And again, we'll wait and see what happens. Looking at Chris Molina's team, he started 3 wide receivers, but then goes Travis Etienne and Josh Jacobs. As a dynasty guy, Brandon, what are your thoughts on Travis Etienne? Because obviously coming out of college, the hype was there. The draft capital was certainly there as one of the rare running backs to go in the 1st round, but then he gets hurt before we ever get to see him do anything. Do you expect a bounce back? Do you like him better in Doug Peterson's offense?
Yeah, that's funny you brought up Etienne, because I was just about to say where Joe took Deontay Johnson. If I was him, I would have taken Travis Etienne instead of Deontay Johnson. I don't know if you know this, but I live in Jacksonville. So
I had no idea. Oh, my goodness. This is how damn good of a host I am.
So all the reports are that he's super healthy. He's running routes out of the slot. They're going to use him a ton. It was a mess last year, so it's probably for the best that he didn't have to deal with that last year. I think Peterson's going to use him a lot. I really like ETN, especially. James Robinson is not back on the field. I don't know when, if he'll be back 100% this year at all. And then they have Snoop Connor, and I have some, feelings about him that we don't have to go into. But he's really their only healthy running back. And I think Trevor Lawrence is going to really use him, depend on him, with his familiarity at Clemson.
Yeah. Outside of Joe, I'm noticing everybody in the league has 2 running backs already. So this is something kind of you touched on, Austin, that this may have been a gamble that got pushed a little bit too far because everybody else is loading up on running backs. Sometimes it benefits you to have 1 or 2 others in the league running the same strategy as you, because it lets certain positions fall a little bit further. But if everybody's loading up on running backs and you're the one person not doing it, that wide receiver value looks great until you're starting a very bad second running back every week. I happen to know for a fact that this was an auto draft. I'm trying to quickly do the count here. I think it's about the RB 15, maybe 16 for Alvin Kamara in the 4th round. Austin, right now we have no idea what's going on with Alvin Kamara and his suspension. I've seen people who I trust say that it may not even actually happen this year. It could be something that gets pushed into the 2023 season. How are you approaching Alvin Kamara going into fantasy drafts?
Yeah, I think in this draft, he goes in around the right round, but with the wrong roster build, which obviously was some to do with the auto pick. But
Yeah.
I don't want Kamara as my RB1. If I get 2 running backs early, like we saw several people do, then I might take Kamara then, where I can have him kind of stashed on my bench just in case, either as trade bait if he does play or actually start him. But I'm mostly avoiding him right now in drafts until we get more certainty. I tend to favor just certainty in general in life, so I'm avoiding him. But if I were to draft him, he would probably be my 3rd running back off the board.
That makes a lot of sense. And then similar to Alvin Kamara, and the thing that I just noticed happened that hasn't happened in a lot of drafts I've been seeing, and it's not happening in most ADP. DeAndre Hopkins goes off the board in the 7th round. We know for a fact DeAndre Hopkins is going to miss 6 games. So you have Kamara, who may miss 6 games, going in the 4th round. DeAndre Hopkins, who is going to miss 6 games going in the 7th round. And I hate mentioning players that haven't been drafted yet, but it's all about my argument. Chris Godwin, who could miss 6 games, but the reports have slightly changed on him. And this is one of the first drafts I've seen Hopkins go ahead of Godwin. So I guess just continuing on the Alvin Kamara question, Brandon, guys who are going to miss games early in the season, are you avoiding them in single-digit rounds? Are you a person who avoids them altogether in the draft? How do you approach that? Guys like DeAndre Hopkins, Chris Godwin, and also Alvin Kamara.
I could still draft them in the single rounds. I actually like the situation, how it was drafted, because he has the 3 wide receivers that are legit receivers. And then if you think about it, after week 6, you get DeAndre Hopkins. If he's back to himself, I mean, you have another elite wide receiver, that could push you for a league winner near the end of the season. So in that, I obviously wouldn't want to depend on DeAndre Hopkins. I mean, obviously you're not depending on him the first 6 weeks, but I would want that kind of depth, because who knows, missing those 6 weeks, he might come back and he might it might take him 4 more weeks to really get going. Absolutely. So we don't know, but in that sense, you could wait till week 10 and still be okay, wide receiver wise.
And I'm going to continue with you on this just because I know you're also a big dynasty guy. Rookie wide receivers are very interesting in redraft because sometimes it can take 4 to 6 weeks for them to do anything. And usually you have to have patience with them or they're going to get cut off of your team before they ever perform for you. One of the things I've noticed is there seems to be a pretty big disconnect about who the rookie wide receiver 1 is for dynasty leagues versus redraft leagues. So far we've only seen 2 go, Drake London and Treylon Burks, unless I'm missing somebody in the middle there wide receiver wise. I don't think that I am though. So London goes in the 6th round, Burks goes in the 7th round. And my argument has been they have landed in the most favorable spots for 2022, whereas I'm a big Garrett Wilson guy when it comes to dynasty. How do you feel about the rookie wide receivers in redraft, and should they come off the board differently in redraft versus dynasty?
Yes, I do think that. And another part is pre-draft, I was not very high on London. I think I had him as my wide receiver 5 or 6.
Okay.
But I've raised him a little bit, but I think definitely redraft London because of the opportunity. I think that you know they have to throw it to someone, and then same with Burks. But yeah, I think I'm a big Garrett Wilson fan. I'm a big Chris Olave fan. Both of those I think are going to be better dynasty wide receivers. But yes, I think there's difference because Burks and London are going to have to get targets as rookies. There's not much else around them.
Yeah, exactly.
But dynasty, I believe in the talent of Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave over them.
Let's keep the wide receiver talk going. I noticed something that we talk about at Club Fantasy quite often is the Denver wide receiver room. And we had Just Cheesin take Jerry Jeudy at the end of the 5th round. And then 2 picks later, Jacob Lundy, who I know drafts with the Fantasy Whisperers, who kind of helped us get this show started. Very sharp drafter, grabs Cortland Sutton. Austin, I don't know if I've ever gotten your opinion on the Jerry Jeudy, Cortland Sutton fantasy debacle that we get into a fight with weekly at Club Fantasy. So how do you feel about where they both went? Should one have went before the other? How are your feelings on those 2 Denver wide receivers?
Well, first off, I think they went a little bit later than I would have expected, actually. Like going after Adam Thielen and Hollywood Brown is really surprising to me. I've been seeing them go a lot earlier than that in a lot of the drafts I've been doing. So I think in general you could bump them up. I do prefer Cortland Sutton over Jerry Jeudy this season, and I think the reason for that is because of who the quarterback now is. Russell Wilson, his specialty is throwing to the edges of the field. He doesn't throw over the middle of the field as much as other quarterbacks would. And so because of that, you're really going to want to target the X receiver in that offense, which is going to be Cortland Sutton. He's going to be the one lining up, going down the edge and going downfield. Jerry Jeudy, I think, experienced a lot of success last year because he's got that underneath route running ability that can really make it easy for quarterbacks who don't have the arm of Russell Wilson, like a Drew Lock, like a Teddy Bridgewater. And so I think we're going to see that flip this year where Cortland Sutton really gets to reach his potential. And then I do like Tim Patrick as kind of a value play in later rounds. I am not convinced that he's going to be necessarily ahead of Jeudy. And I also just would note in general, people sometimes will start making arguments on Twitter about different quarterbacks and why can't they sustain 3 fantasy relevant wide receivers. It is incredibly rare that a team has 3 receivers within the top 30 of fantasy receivers in a given year. Yeah. And the quarterbacks who have done it are pretty random and sporadic. It's not necessarily it's the elite guys. Like Tom Brady has done it and Ben Roethlisberger has done it, but there are other guys that are nowhere near as talented as those 2 that have also done it. So
I wouldn't. Ben Roethlisberger did it when his arm was falling off just a few years ago. And wasn't that the same year? There was another quarterback who did it that year who wasn't good. And I cannot remember who it was now. So it's interesting. Like you said, there's no rhyme or reason to say it's going to be an elite quarterback who pulls this feat off. But the good news is for Tim Patrick, you don't have to pay that high. But it's good to see. I feel like I am a very emotional fantasy player. So I started off very high on Jerry Jeudy. And every news report has pushed me away from him. And I think I've went too far. So now I'm way in on Tim Patrick and I love Cortland Sutton, but maybe I need to open my heart to Jerry Jeudy again. Brendan, I was taking a look at, and we haven't really talked about, I think it's Frumpold's team. And you and I kind of talked about the tight ends a little earlier in the draft. So Frumpold as the 4th quarterback lands Patrick Mahomes, who I think we could all agree has very much QB1 upside. Darren Waller is also an interesting pick on his very next pick in the 5th round. He lands Waller as the 6th tight end because Zach knows what's up and takes Dalton Schultz ahead of him. How are your thoughts on Waller in this new offense? And it's obviously not a new offense for Waller. I mean, I guess it is because it's Josh McDaniels now. But what I'm getting at is there's way more competition for targets than when we saw Darren Waller as a legit overall tight end 1 candidate. So what are your thoughts on how Frumpold is attacked Patrick Mahomes and Darren Waller in the mid rounds? Are those guys you're willing to kind of pay up a little bit for still, or would you rather just kind of wait and see who falls to you later?
As far as Patrick Mahomes, I probably would have taken Mahomes there, especially since 3 quarterbacks got taken ahead of him. And I still think he's still quarterback 2. Okay. And then Waller, I don't think he has with Devontae Adams there. I don't think he's a top 3 tight end anymore, but I would actually take him over Kittle and your boy Dalton Schultz because I like them better. And Kittle, I think Kittle's a better NFL player than
it's hard to argue that with Kittle because he blocks.
Right. Yeah. I mean, he's a monster when he gets the ball, but they just don't get him. They don't feed him the ball like other teams. So, and just back to that Denver conversation.
Oh, please, yes.
I agree with the Sutton and Judy take, but someone that a lot of people have kind of been a little bit more on is KJ Hamler. I think KJ Hamler is going to be really good for Denver, and I think he could be like the poor man's Tyler Lockett for Russell Wilson. He has kind of that skill set, so I actually like him more than Tim Patrick.
Interesting. And now, so that's a big take because Tim Patrick has – it's interesting. We treat Tim Patrick like he's a proven commodity, but really in these last 2 years where he's basically been a full-time player because we had the Judy injury and the Sutton injuries, he still hadn't cracked, if I remember correctly, wide receiver 35, maybe not even wide receiver 40. And now we're expecting him to be better than that because of Russell Wilson. But he's also hopefully competing with these more healthy wide receivers, whereas Hamler has even connected his own name to Tyler Lockett and said he wants to be that. So you think Hamler's free in fantasy drafts. Nobody's drafting this guy.
Yeah, you can get him late. Ultimately, I think Hamler's like the best in like best ball because I don't know if he's going to do like every week. He might be like Tyler Lockett that who frustrate people. He would have like 4 games where he'd have over 30 points and then he'd have like a 5-point game. It could be very similar to that. I see Patrick being like a really big like possession and red zone target for Russell Wilson, but I don't know if he'll get the high amount of targets to kind of, compete for, a good wide receiver 3.
Yeah. I want to take a look at Jacob Lundy's team. There are 2 players I want you guys to kind of focus in on for me. Austin, Robert Woods. Robert Woods is a fantasy Twitter favorite. Bobby Trees. Everybody knows him. Everybody loves him. But he tore his ACL last year, I believe, middle of the season, and then moves over to the Tennessee Titans. However, when you look at Tennessee, Traylon Burks is a rookie, and he's having conditioning/asthma issues. We're not 100% what's going on there. Obviously, A.J. Brown is good. Robert Woods is likely more of a number 1 in Tennessee than he was with the Rams because Cooper Kupp was there. I haven't heard anything positive or negative about his injury, but you're landing him in the 8th round, and specifically for Jacob's team, it looks like his 5th wide receiver. What are your thoughts on Woods moving into this season?
Yeah, I think particularly because of this roster construction, I like where he got Robert Woods in the 8th round, and he's at least his 5th receiver. So someone that could sit on the bench for a while until he's back healthy. And I really like Robert Woods. I think he's still fantasy relevant. You have a little concern because he is reaching the age where you start to see fall off from fantasy receivers. And so that's worth considering in dynasty leagues. But I think, they've got to throw the ball to somebody in Tennessee. And they really only have Robert Woods and Traylon Burks when they're both healthy at the receiver position. I do think Austin Hooper is going to get a bit more attention this year, but I feel really good about Woods. And Tannehill, he can still throw the ball. Like he is always one of the most undervalued quarterbacks in the NFL to me. He's a professional quarterback. He's going to be just fine and be able to get the ball to his receivers. So I think Bobby Trees will be just fine. And that's a really good value to get him for when he's healthy.
And then we always come back to this as we hit these rounds in the draft, Brandon. We talked about, did the quarterbacks go kind of where they should have went? And we all agreed it's a very good order, and maybe it's when we would start gambling on them. I always love when you get to the end of the draft and then see who they could have had. And I find it interesting, two-time MVP, Aaron Rodgers goes off the board, if my math is correct, as the 9th quarterback. Dak Prescott, who led the number 1 yardage offense in the NFL, is the 10th quarterback. And Tom Brady, the fantasy QB2 last year, is the 11th quarterback. Knowing where these guys fell, how do you feel about even your own pick of Joe Burrow in the 5th round? Are you still good with that? Are you still good with QB early? Do you think these first 5 guys are that much better than these next 5?
With who you just named, I have a little regret, but I think I'm still fine with taking Burrow because, I just think with those weapons there, he's going to put up great numbers. But yeah, if I knew Dak and Brady were going to be there, Rodgers, I don't know what's going to happen there. With the
and that's
rookies
fair
and everything.
Yeah. And that's really fair because one of you guys dropped the quote earlier that Rodgers is going to miss Adams more than Adams is going to miss Rodgers. So Rodgers, I'm okay with being down on. Dak is interesting to me. I've been helping some of the club fantasy people get their rankings input, and I saw someone with Dak as low as like QB 18, I think it was, which is just bananas to me.
That's crazy.
We're going a little bit too far with it. And then Tom Brady, it's hilarious. In football, he couldn't be more respected. In fantasy football, he seems pretty perpetually disrespected. Like he's always there late and he seems to always perform. I guess you could be afraid of the Chris Godwin thing, but Zach backed him up with Trey Lance. And if you believe in the rushing upside of Trey Lance, I'm seeing a lot of 2 quarterback and a few 2 tight end drafters this week. You're going to get yelled at by me shortly. But I do want to talk about someone we have to talk about every week. And this might be the earliest he's went. And I know Chris believes in him. It's not a troll job. So Brandon, I specifically am a hater of Cole Kmet. Every week he gets drafted, I give a hard time about it. Normally, it's very jokingly. 10th round feels way early for me for someone who I feel like is a large gamble on Cole Kmet. The running narrative on Cole Kmet is look at how many targets last year. They're going to go up and he's going to score more touchdowns. What are your thoughts on Cole Kmet as a player in this new offense?
Yeah, with Kmet, the Bears don't have weapons. They have Darnell Mooney and a bunch of like guys. I don't know what they're doing. I don't know what that offense is doing. But in that, I just looked where Cole Kmet went and the tight ends that are left. The only one that I'd probably take over him, tight end wise, is Gesicki. So I agree with the tight end. I might not have taken him there, but I agree like that would have been the Nets tight end I would have taken.
Okay.
You would have to figure he's going to score more touchdowns just if he continues to get that target amounts. So that would help. But I've seen people say that Kmet could finish as a top 10 tight end. I think he's at best a borderline, 12 to 14.
And he went off as the tight end 12 here.
Yeah. So that's right around where I think he'll finish.
So I am of the thought, and if you've watched this show at any point in the past and tuned in for any 5-minute period, I am of the thought that the targets will not be there. I believe that they are going to run a very Green Bay system where no single tight end has been targeted more than, I don't even remember my own numbers right now, but it's definitely not more than 70 times in a season in the last 2 years. And the entire position hasn't been targeted more than 100 times. And I definitely get there are no other weapons in Chicago, but I think we're putting a lot of faith in Justin Fields, a lot of faith in an offense that doesn't believe in the tight end, and a lot of faith in Cole Kmet, who just finished as the tight end 20 on 93 targets. But I digress. I kind of touched on this. So in a regular league, Austin, I am very much against drafting backup quarterbacks and backup tight ends unless you're doing something weird at the position. You're drafting early like this and you're waiting to see if a guy's going to be healthy. Only 2 quarterback teams we have is Just Cheesin with Justin Herbert and then back ends it with Aaron Rodgers, and then Tom Brady back end with Trey Lance. What are your thoughts on doubling up on these 1Z positions, especially when you have Tom Brady and Justin Herbert established guys in those roles?
Yeah, we also have Lamar Jackson backed up with Derek Carr. So I have favorites and not favorites in this category. The Justin Herbert, Aaron Rodgers one, I don't really love that 2 quarterback move because we haven't seen any injury problems from Justin Herbert. The only thing you're really doing there is getting some potential trade bait if someone wants one of those 2 guys later. And I think that's a fine strategy because in redraft, when you're doing your draft, you're not just picking your starters, you're picking your foundation of what's going to give you trade capital later in the year. So I could get it from that standpoint, but you can only start one of those guys. And, if you're going to take Justin Herbert in the 4th round and then Aaron Rodgers in the 9th round, why didn't you just wait for Aaron Rodgers in the 9th round to begin with? He's still probably going to be up in that same tier. The Lamar Jackson, Derek Carr one, I like because Lamar Jackson has had injury troubles, and with mobile quarterbacks like Jackson, you might want that insurance, and Derek Carr is pretty consistent. My favorite, though, is the Tom Brady Trey Lance move because I'm working on my Trey Lance article right now, and
there you go.
Frankly, I am not betting on Trey Lance being the starter until I know Jimmy Garoppolo is on a different team. I'm going to talk about that. And so in redraft leagues, I don't want him to be my QB1. I want to, I'm fine having him on my roster if I have someone else ready to go. that I know is going to be the starter week 1. And so this was the perfect move by Zach, our buddy at Club Fantasy, to get his number 1 guy and then take a dart throw on a quarterback that has really great upside.
And to get them both in double-digit rounds, which I think is a key there.
Yeah.
Brandon, do you have any different thoughts on double quarterback, double tight end in just a standard league like this?
I usually do that. I usually double up just because I want to make sure I have someone for the bye or if there's injury. But I do like what Austin is saying. If you have a legit starter, then wait on the second quarterback. I think the Rodgers pick was too early. If you take a quarterback that early, okay. I would wait till the teens. I'm just gonna let you know I'm gonna pick a quarterback my last.
I was actually gonna make that prediction here in a second. I'm like, well, if you do that, I have a feeling I know who your next pick's going to be. So, and it's interesting. Everybody's doing it. So I don't know. I don't see this many people doing it in a single draft. So I don't know if everybody's kind of like following suit. Just so everybody knows, I try to get this show done by noon. So we are going to jump here as soon as Brandon makes his pick into Brandon running down his own team and then Austin running down their team. I'm not going to ask them for takeaways from the draft. We've done a ton of takeaways from the draft already. So I'm going to get Brandon's team up here. We are just about 5 picks away from ending the draft, and then Brandon's going to make his last pick. And then, Brandon, I'm just going to ask you after you make your pick to kind of run down your team in general. If you had a strategy coming into this, and we talked a little bit about, the 3rd round reversal, obviously. If you had a strategy coming in, if that strategy was forced to change because of other people's picks. So you've now made your pick. I'm going to scroll up towards the top here. You do not have to go pick by pick, but just kind of a rundown of if you like your team, if you like the way it shook out, and if things went the way you expected them to.
Normally, I like my wide receivers to be better. There's good talent, but situations like DK Metcalf, I don't love his situation. But like I said, the wide receivers going early, usually I can get Chase or Jefferson at 1-7, and I couldn't. So then, I flipped the script with Harris, Najee. Then, like we said, I thought Chubb was such a value. And then, I went the 2 wide receivers. Yeah. I'm a big Scary Terry fan. I think even with Wentz, he's going to do great. It's the best quarterback he's had. Then I just couldn't pass on DK there. I still think he could get 1,000 yards, maybe 5-6 touchdowns, still good. Burrow, like I said, is like kind of the line for me of the quarterbacks I really like in the top tier. And then I went with an upside guy with Drake London. Like we kind of talked about, he's going to get a ton of targets there. Yeah. I talked about if I don't get the top 5 tight ends, I go someone like Goddard. He was there.
I say you got to name drop a guy and then still draft him, so that worked out.
I know, it was crazy. And then, like we kind of talked about, I got 2 wide receivers I think have great upside for the end of the year. They're going to probably be slow to start, Chris Godwin and Michael Gallup. So I think I was okay with that because I got some wide receivers later, like Jalen Tolbert. So it's kind of like I got the Tolbert Gallup thing in the Cowboys until Gallup gets up and running. Probably not great that I got Dotson and McLaurin, but I'm a huge Jahan Dotson fan. Third running back isn't great, but I've been hearing that Patterson wants to play wide receiver more, so they have to play someone at running back. And then I did double tap the tight end, Gerald Everett. I kind of like him as a sleeper this year. And last, Justin Fields. I was a big Justin Fields fan before last year. I think he still has that running ability. And since I Burrow, it's more like if he totally explodes, I get that upside with the running, but I still have Burrow all year.
And then one quick question before we jump over to Austin's team. 3 running backs. I know you typically say you start wide receiver heavy. Is 3 running backs kind of a standard for you in fantasy football? I would not be comfortable doing that. It makes me queasy just looking at it. It's just very scary. So is that something you'll do and then just play the waiver wire game, or is that just the way this draft happened to fall?
I think that's just the way this draft happened to fall.
Okay.
Since I wasn't crazy about Metcalf, I just tried to kind of group a bunch of receivers. And by the time I decided I want another running back, after I got Algier, I was kind of like, I don't really care about any of these other guys. I was like, I'd rather just, look at the waivers. But no, I'm not I'm not overly happy with 3 running backs either.
Okay.
With the injuries to running backs. So,
and it's a mock, folks. This is what we do this for, to practice. One last thing I want to draw attention to his team. He said he normally likes better wide receivers, but Chris Godwin in the 8th, if he ends up starting week 1, is going to be an absolute steal for you. Jumping over to Austin's team. Austin, same questions as before. Did you come in with a strategy? Do you like your team? How did it all play out for you?
Yeah, so my strategy is always tends to be just draft the best player available, and just I try to have a fairly balanced roster. A couple of players I wanted to talk about. First off, Clyde Edwards-Helaire. Getting him as my 3rd running back, I actually really like. Now, I've been down on Edwards-Helaire for the past year and a half since I drafted him his rookie season, and then it just all went downhill from there. But the way that Kansas City has constructed their offense, I do think there's a good chance they're running the ball this year. And so I think Edwards-Helaire could actually see a decent 2 to 3 year jump. And so I like him as a 3rd running back option. Don't necessarily have to start him, but if he pops off, that'd be great. And then Tyler Lockett, getting him in the 8th round. I mean, man, the fall of the Seattle receivers, like, I get it because the quarterbacks are rough. Now, if Jimmy Garoppolo gets traded there, that would solve everybody's problems.
People are going to feel really good about Tyler Lockett at that point. So.
Exactly. But my thing with Lockett is that he actually became a bit of a target monster once Geno Smith was starting last year. And so I think he's actually much more valuable in PPR leagues because he's been associated with that. He either gets a 60-yard touchdown or he gets 1 reception for 5 yards, and that's it. But I think with the quarterback situation, he's actually going to get more targets, and that's going to be helpful for him. And then the last player is just Russell Gage, getting him in the 9th round. He did go after Chris Godwin, but he's going to be the number 2 receiver if Godwin is hurt for Tom Brady. And when he's not, he'll be the number 3 receiver, who was last year was Antonio Brown. And Antonio Brown was a top tier fantasy receiver last year. So Russell Gage in the 9th round, and he's my 4th receiver.
Yeah.
I feel like that's incredible value.
There's a world where all 3 receivers play and see 7 to 8 targets per game if that's how Brady wants to run this offense. One last pick of yours I wanted to kind of point out too. Mecole Hardman all the way in the 13th. I know it's not the most popular pick in the world and everyone's very down on him, but I've made the statement multiple times. They drafted Mecole Hardman to be the Tyreek Hill replacement, and this is the first chance he has to be the Tyreek Hill replacement. Let's give the guy a chance. And in the 13th round, you just really can't beat that value whatsoever. I'm going to be perfectly honest. I don't have an oops of the draft. We did a really good job talking about everybody's teams. I don't like all the double tight end and quarterback drafting, but Brandon did a really good job saying why it makes sense. I do want to just draw everyone's attention to Joe's team only because of his interesting draft composition. 5 wide receivers and then back ends it with 4 running backs. This is something you'll see a lot with folks who go 0 running back or 0 or anchor RB. He did get sniped on Chase Edmonds, he said on the pick right before, but backed it up with Cordero Patterson. And I find Cordero Patterson an interesting pick this year because last year he was listed as a wide receiver, but he was mostly playing running back. This year he could be a running back who's mostly playing wide receiver, and that's far more valuable for fantasy options. I'm going to blow through this outro because I like to get everybody out of here at noon, but take your time. Brandon, remind everybody where they can find your work. Thank you so much for today. You brought such great insights to the show. Like I said, let everybody know what you're working on and where they can find it.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And you can find me on Twitter at HeyB3. I'm HAYEB3, and I do work for IDP Guys and Dynasty Nerds. So check out those. Definitely check out the IDP Guys YouTube channel. There's tons of great content on there, not only mine, but a lot of people on staff.
And I have Brandon's Twitter handle linked in the description of this video. So if you're looking to follow him, and you should be, make sure you hit that follow button. Austin, you have any parting words for the folks? Anything you're working on right now?
No, just be on the lookout for my Trey Lance article coming up mid next week. Cross your fingers for me that any news that is coming about Garoppolo happens prior to that artiarticle dropping, so that it's just completely irrelevant.
I dropped those articles at 11. The news is dropping at noon. You know that's how it's going down. So. So real quick, the most important thing of my outro is, no pun intended, is going to continue our Look Inside series this upcoming Wednesday, but we sadly will not be live at 7 o'clock. The show is still going to air at 7, but we're not going to be live because our guest needed us to pre-record. And that guest is Stefania Bell of ESPN. Maybe you've heard of her. We are going to be covering the Bills, the Titans, and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers with the one and only Stefania Bell. The show goes live at 7 o'clock. Make sure you're checking it out. Thank you so much to Brandon. We will have another show next week. Emerson Beery at Dynasty Analyst on Twitter is going to be here with the mock draft show. We have a bunch of articles on our website, including Chris Molina's Josh Allen article that's going to drop here in about an hour. Thank you all for joining the draft. Thank you all for joining the show. Hit that subscribe button. We have great Women of Fantasy content coming out soon, and that all starts with Stefania Bell this upcoming Wednesday. Thank you so much.